everybody, welcome back up to the Vinyl Attic for another episode of Vinyl Fetish. We're in our 100 albums that should be in your collection. Today is a really important album. It's a really important album. We're going to talk about the Indestructible Beat of Soweto that came out in 1985 on Sandinista Records. This is my original copy. I got into South African music and really started getting into it in 1983. I was living in Brixton and went to this really great Free Nelson Mandela benefit concert that had Jimmy Cliff and Oswald and Gil Scott-Heron and all this great South African music that I'd never really heard before. It had been in the background in some of the music that I like King Sunny Ade, who we talked about earlier in this series. But there's this explosion of South African music, and the explosion of South African music has to do with increasing awareness about the hell and racism and violence of apartheid in South Africa. And this record changed the world. And let me explain to you why the Soweto is a township in Johannesburg, South Africa. It was created in the 1930s when the nation really started racially segregating. Apartheid is officially created in 1948. It's a system of racial hierarchy where white people have certain privileges, including the right to vote, and everybody else doesn't. And it created a modern version of economic slavery that is known as South African apartheid. The township of Soweto kind of got some global attention over something that happened very violent called the Soweto Massacre in 1976. There's not a lot of awareness about South African apartheid in the 1970s. And then in 1976, a group of 10,000 high school students were marching. There was a big civil rights movement. This is the movement that Nelson Mandela sort of became the most prominent name associated with. There was a march in Soweto, and the South African police came out and just opened fire on the crowd, killing 31 of those students, including, minors. And the massacre, and that just was the start of it. That was just the first day of the killing of the protesters. Really put South African apartheid into the mainstream radar of people thinking about injustices around the world. We're on the tail end of the civil rights movement in the United States. Now we're sort of focused on where racial oppression is existing in other places, and South Africa was a big one. And so Soweto is now on the radar. This music here, which was recorded over a 4-year period between 1981 and 1984, represents a couple different styles of South African music rooted in Zulu culture. The most common is Mbaqanga. I'm not saying that right because in Zulu there's a little tick that Mbaqanga. A little ticking that I can't do because I'm not fluent in Zulu. Mbaqanga is the word for porridge. It's sort of the sustenance. So this food was sort of what people ate every day to kind of get them through the day. So this music is kind of the bread of life, as it were. Very common infusion of jazz music and jazz instrumentation, especially the guitar, and Zulu folk music. There were other forms represented on this record, including Maskandi. Maskandi is another Zulu folk form, and I'm going to get this wrong. Isikamia, which is a kind of vocal a cappella South African music that a lot of people know, because one of the artists on this record who kind of went on to global fame is Ladysmith Black Mambazo. Ladysmith Black Mambazo has 2 tracks on this record, and they became kind of associated with the sound of South Africa for a reason we'll talk about in a minute. One of the artists on here is Mahathini and the Mahatela Queens, who are kind of a Mbanga supergroup made up of 3 different groups that after this record came out and started to gain some traction, actually made another record in 1987 called Soweto Paris, recorded in Paris, and in 1988, played at Wembley at the big 70th birthday celebration for Nelson Mandela that was held while Nelson Mandela was still in prison in South Africa. There was a big festival at Wembley. I'd been at Wembley a few years earlier in 1985 for Live Aid. We're hoping to go to Wembley in August for the Taylor Swift show. But this was George Michael and Peter Gabriel, Stevie Wonder, and one of the artists that appeared on this record was gaining national attention. So this record kind of in the growing genre of world music sort of slipped out as people are concerned about what's happening in South Africa as the anti-apartheid movement grows. The anti-apartheid movement, by the time this record comes out, is a feature of our activist life at my college, at Emory University, where we were regularly protesting and encouraging Emory to divest from South Africa, including its stocks in Coca-Cola, which were present in South Africa. We had a little shanty town set up on the quad, kind of similar to the Gaza protests that are happening on college campus now. And this music was becoming the soundtrack of that, getting out through the concern about South Africa. One of the people that heard this record in 1985 was a certain Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel fame, who heard this album and, like a lot of us, thought this music sounded like another planet, but also represented this indestructible beat, these people without a lot of resources that are making this incredibly joyous and passionate music. And even if you don't speak Zulu, I certainly don't, you can hear the commitment to struggling against depression in this music. So he makes that sort of a theme of his next album, which is called Graceland. Graceland includes Lady Smith Black Mambazo in the recordings, and a lot of the guitar styles, and some of these musicians end up on the Graceland recordings. And of course that album in 1986 becomes the biggest album ever. It wins all the Grammys and wins all the awards, and it's on the radio constantly, and everybody's hearing this music going, what is this? What is this strange music? This isn't rock and roll, it's not folk. What is this music? And being sent back to things that inspired Paul Simon, like these great artists. In the meantime, lots of great African musicians are gaining more and more audience, like Youssou N'Dour, who's Senegalese. This is his Nelson Mandela album. Ends up on a Peter Gabriel record, and there's this incredible growing awareness. That growing awareness not only brings more people to the genre, but brings more people to the understanding of what the hell is going on in South Africa, what apartheid really is, the violence, the oppression, the racism, just the incredible disgust that system would exist. So there's more and more pressure around divestment. There's movements like Don't Play in South Africa or Boycott South Africa, the Sun City movement that becomes the We Don't Play in Sun City single and album that U2 and many other great artists, including the Ramones, were a part of. By 1988, there is a general awareness. I have a very clear memory of sitting down in 1987 with Bono when all this was happening, talking about how can music help bring people. We were sitting in a bar in a hotel in Atlanta. First, we'd been kicked out of the bar because we weren't dressed appropriately, and then somebody showed the latest Time magazine that had a picture of U2 on the cover, and we got a really good seat at the bar. But we had a really a deep discussion about how this music is going to bring people on board into the anti-apartheid movement. And in fact, it did. It played a major role. It's 2024. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the end of apartheid in South Africa in 1994. South Africa certainly has struggles. It's had struggles and continues to have struggles like any nation does, especially a new nation like the post-apartheid South Africa nation that's been finding its way since 1994. But the reason that apartheid is over, for a large part, has to do with this record and the impact this record made on the consciousness of the world. And so we had to, in our 100 albums, have the Indestructible Beat of Soweto. In Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, many of the albums that we've talked about have been included, but this is one of the albums that's included in their 500 greatest albums of all time, and I want to include it in my 100 albums that should be in your collection. Okay, there you go. There's that. Speaking of the Ramones, next week we're going to talk about a Ramones album, and probably not the Ramones album that you're thinking of. We're gonna ask the question: what happens when the Ramones and producer Phil Spector get in the room together? What's that like? All right, that's coming up next on Vinyl Fetish. Until then, when you talk about albums that matter, this album frickin' matters. This album changed the world. This music matters. This struggle against oppression matters. You matter. So let's talk about it.